Jesus. But Jesus is described in today's text from Isaiah and in Handel's Messiah as a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We read in the Gospels that on more than one occasion, his heart was filled with pity for troubled, needy people. That he wept over the city of Jerusalem, crying out, "O Jerusalem, you who stoned and killed the prophets, how often would I have liked to gather you to myself as a mother hen her chickens, but you would not come to me." Christ was capable of extraordinary pity. He felt badly for people. But we don't want to feel badly. We want God to spare us, save us from feeling bad. We don't want to be hurt. We don't want to get upset. And that's okay. I understand that. That's how I feel. It's normal to want to avoid feeling badly, to escape getting hurt. It is understandable that that is what we most turn to God for. We want God to protect us from being vulnerable to upset, hurt, and feeling badly. We like the statement, God is in his heaven and all is right with the world and us. But Jesus was a man of sorrow and acquainted with grief. And if you and I wish to enjoy normal, gratifying human connections, we must not insist that God spare us the grief that goes with them. Gregory DeJanikian's poem, Children's Hospital Emergency Room, speaks to this challenge. Children's Hospital Emergency Room. You do not want to be here. You wish it were you the doctor is stitching up. It's a cut on the chin, fixable this time, but deep enough to make you think of gashes, puncture wounds, flesh unfolding to the bone. Your child is lying on the table, restrained. You must be still, the nurse who cradles her head is saying, and the doctor is embroidering delicately, patiently, like a kind aunt. But there is not enough solace in that to make you stop thinking of other children whose hurt blooms like a dark interior bruise. In other rooms there is hysteria, the sound of glass shattering. And in the next bay, there is the child who is sleeping too soundly. You do not want to hear such silence. Wake up, you whisper. Wake up. But there is nothing you can do. When your daughter calls out, "It hurts." "I'm here," you say. "Be still. I'm here." Though you wish none of you were. And if anyone offered you now an escape, you would take it for all of you. The child asleep or your child, those in pain or mercifully out. You would take it and fly. Though never would you feel this rush of joy as you do now when your daughter is returned to you, unhealed but whole, your lips pressing against her cheek, and your hands hovering like two shy birds above her. No, if we insist that we be spared from hurt, sorrow, or upset, then we must choose not to parent. But as early as adolescence, we are warned of the costs of attempting connection, the hurt that can accompany heart hunger. I once read of a short but touching conversation between a wise father and his 19-year-old son. The son shared with his dad that he and the girl he had been dating for several weeks had decided to go steady. The father responded that he hoped they both would be careful and that they really knew what they were doing. "Don't worry, Dad," replied his son. "If things don't work out, we'll just split." "Son," the father said, "rocks split, wood splits, people tear. But the heart will be heard." There is the poem. When we are children, we are nourished on fairy tales, and love's journeys are without the risks of grief. The journey always ends with a benediction, and they all live happily ever after. But some wise soul instructed us that more often the last word belonging to love is grief. And so W.H. Auden wrote his masterpiece poem, "Stop All the Clocks." Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone. Bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle mourning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he is dead. Put dark bows around the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east, my west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone, pack up the moon, and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean, and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can come to any good. The clocks will not stop. Good will come again. The love sufferer will find ways to regain her feet and journey on, perhaps assisted by such as the wisdom of Khalil Gibran, who wrote, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven?" Yes, within our personal lives, fulfillment seems not possible in the absence of some feeling badly, some upset, some sorrow. What about our faithfulness to the church and its mission? I've come to the conclusion that a central cause of the decline of our churches is our failure to be moved with extraordinary pity, to be willing to feel badly for wounded, needy people as Christ did. Thomas Childers, in his landmark book about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD among World War II veterans gives us an unforgettable account of the struggle of Corporal Willis Allen. Allen lost both legs when a shell exploded in his foxhole in France. He couldn't comfortably cope with the reality of finally returning to his life in the States as half a man, as he felt it to be. But he was determined to try, despite his immense sense of anger and depression. The author describes the scene when his wife, Grace, and their young daughter, Judy, took the train to visit Willis after he had arrived at a military hospital in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Then Grace stepped into the room. She stood behind Judy, holding her by the shoulders, hugging her tightly. Willis stared, his lips parted slightly as if to speak, but he could not utter a word. They had not seen each other in almost 2 years. If she was shocked by what she saw, she did not show it. She looked squarely at him, taking him in, trying not to stare. His face was drawn. He had lost weight. His blonde hair was thinner, his cheeks slightly sunken. But he was still handsome. The deep blue eyes, the smooth skin. He was trying to sit up in bed. Beneath the covers, she could see them. The outline of bandaged legs that ended suddenly just inches below his crotch. Blunt stumps where the rest of him used to be. She was determined not to cry, not to carry on. Be upbeat. That was the catchword of all the advice givers. But she lost that battle. Sweeping forward past the nurse and the jumble of medical paraphernalia, she bent down and took him gently in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Slowly, he reached out to touch her. His fingertips brushed her cheek. She felt his arms, thin and hard as cables, around her waist, pressing her against him. Baby, baby, she heard herself say finally, what have they done to you? She sobbed, whether for him or for herself or for both of them, she would never know. His chest seemed to heave. He still had not spoken, but he held her close and would not let her go. Willis and Grace made heroic efforts to build a life and continue their marriage together. They had a second child and tried so hard to pick up the pieces and make a success out of their lives. Their heroism was not enough. They failed. Willis's rage and depression turned him violent. He would curse and throw things at Grace, tumble out of his wheelchair and crawl after her on the floor, trying to get at her, to harm her. Once she had to smash a chair over him to protect herself. Alarmed neighbors would hear the uproar and call the police. As adults, their kids would remember, as children, climbing out of a window onto the front lawn in the middle of the night. Police cars with blue lights flashing in their driveway, neighbors staring from the windows. Grace endured Willis's fury as long as she could, then finally took the children and left. Now, I read that. I wept. I felt badly. I got upset. I felt powerful pity. So I picked up the telephone and called the VA hospital in White River Junction. I just read this book about veterans. I'd like to volunteer. What do you need most? We need drivers to get disabled vets to their appointments. Many of them can no longer drive. They have no way to get down here. Where do you live? Haverhill, New Hampshire, I answered. We're desperate for drivers in your area. We had two. They both got to an age when we didn't dare to let them drive anymore, so we pulled the vehicle out of that area. We haven't had one for a few years. Well, I said I can drive, and I'll bet I can recruit some others too. And I did. Dean Rowden was one of the first, as long as his health allowed. Glenn English still drives every Friday. We now have 6 drivers, and we run Tuesday through Friday every week. Our card file includes over 200 veterans, 3 of which are blind, and we're in our 10th year. We cover from Lindenville on down, and east-west from Littleton, New Hampshire, to Groton, Vermont, and a bit beyond. On most every run, a vet will express heartfelt thanks. But it all began with feeling badly, feeling upset, feeling pity. And that is how Christ felt, and how his mission finds its feet and voice today. As you look about you in your community, your nation, your world, what is it that arouses your pity? What upsets you? What makes you feel badly? Perhaps above all else, don't make the terrible mistake of failing to include yourself when necessary, and at times it is necessary. Whatever it is,